So welcome everyone to the Astrology Squad. We're here to give you the astrological inside track on newsmakers, celebrities, and historical figures. By doing so, we hope to reach you and teach you about the planets and the zodiac sign, so you can learn more about your own horoscope, as well as what astrology can and cannot offer. My name is Frank Clifford. I'm a full-time astrologer, writer, teacher. I run the London School of Astrology, which offers courses online and in London. And I'm delighted to be here with my co-host, Richard Swatton, and our special and eminent guest, Rick Levine. Richard, are you happy to introduce yourself?
Yes, I've been an astrologer for 40 years, a professional since 1988, and I'm a psychotherapist by profession along the analytic and humanistic traditions, and I've been a teacher at the LSA for a long time. I'm writing a book on orrery astrology at the moment. It seems that it'll never end, but I'm trying to get there, Frank. I'm sorry about that, but it's working its way through. So although I have a base in traditional astrology, I like psychological astrology, but on my YouTube, I've done a lot of YouTube channel. I've done a lot of mundane, but I haven't been on there for about a year. So maybe I've been remiss, should get back to there, but that's me.
Thanks. And great to have you, Rick Levine. Thank you so much for being here. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, I've been an astrologer for a long time. Like many of us professional astrologers, we never learned astrology. We just kind of remembered it, you know? I guess I've been doing astrology for well over 50 years. And I think it was William Blake who said, if the fool would persist in his folly, he would become wise. Well, that's, you know, I guess what has happened on some level. Although I do see clients on a regular basis, these days it seemed to be spending more time writing and teaching. The internet has changed everything for all astrologers, for those of us who actually were astrologers before, you know, there was an internet and before there were computers even. But I do a monthly YouTube forecast for the month ahead. That's typically seen by 50 to 80,000 people a month. And I also have a Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rick Levine, where I have a number of different tiers where people can get involved with my work all the way up to an apprentice program. And my other weird claim to fame is that I've written something astrological that was published daily for pushing 22 years now. And if you want to talk about a yoga, that's really, I think, the thing that has changed my professional astrology work more than anything. It was for 17, 18 years, I wrote a daily horoscope column for, you know, all signs. These days I call it the Daily Planet Pulse, but it's a daily astrological reflection. And it's available on Instagram and on Facebook at Rick Levine Astrologer, facebook.com/Rick Levine Astrologer, Instagram, Rick Levine Astrologer. And that's kind of sums it up. And like Richard, you know, I approach astrology, I think, from a 21st century psychological, humanistic, maybe tinged with a little bit of Asian philosophies into the mix. I am definitely a product of the 60s. I was in college from 67 to 71, and I was there and I remember it. I love astrology because it's a never-ending game. I feel like these days, although I hear people say maestro and legend and all this kind of crap, I want to know who died. The fact of the matter is, I feel like I have more astrology to learn now than I ever have in my life.
Yeah. When I studied, fortunately, with Liz Green and House of Sportus and all of those kind of early people in the LSA, and I was there on the second term, and I was absolutely determined to do it. And I'd been studying astrology 8 years, right? Traditional, theosophical, Alan Leo, Margaret Hone, all of the kind of Sephiral, you know, all of the English ones. And then when I went on that course, I realized how much I didn't know.
Yeah,
I really didn't. And I think because we've been doing it for so long, we kind of have a kind of plateau, and then we teach, and then everything else, and then there's another resurgence of interest in something, and a deeper layer to go, you know. And I just want to congratulate you, Rick, on your embracing of modern technology. Not a lot of astrologers are doing it because they're afraid of it. So it's brilliant that you have such an open platform.
when people ask me what my sign is, and they're and I feel like I'm in my, channeling my inner smartass mode. I tell them I'm an Aquariarian. That's my sun sign, is I'm an Aquariarian. Now, I have no planets in Aquarius, but I have Uranus rising, Aquarius on the midheaven, and a 4-planet tight Aries stellium and the North Node in the 11th house. And so when it comes to electronic toys and gadgets and technology, I mean, I grew up, my dad was a radio engineer, and we had more vacuum tubes than there is sand on the beach, in
So you're really very, very Aquarian without being Aquarius.
Exactly.
Yeah. So an Aquarian. I like it.
Yeah.
It would suit, wouldn't it, a Uranus rising person to feel they couldn't be quite categorized like that, or by anything else. I got a lot of respect for people who write sun sign columns. It's an art. Even if it's denounced by astrologers, by non-astrologers, skeptics, etc. Whatever the criticisms, there's a tremendous art to sitting down and encapsulating this great truth into something that people can work with.
And of course, as I think Chris Brennan should be credited for saying, sun sign astrology is the gateway drug to real astrology.
Yeah.
For most people, sun sign astrology, whether it was a Linda Goodman book or a daily or weekly horoscope column that just tweaked their interest. That's, and of course, many of us got into astrology because our interest was tweaked, saying that's stupid, it can't possibly work. And you read 2 or 3 books to prove that it can't work, and you find yourself a professional astrologer.
But you're so right, Rick. I mean, I was introduced to astrology at the age of 8, and I didn't know that it was going to be, a lifetime's involvement and passion and everything else. Yeah. And I saw, because on the news, I don't know whether you remember Evadne Price. Now she was I live in a different country than you. Okay, but she was the mystic Meg of the 1960s, and she would come on the television 5 minutes before the news and give a quick rundown of all the signs. And my mother would run from the kitchen, and you've got to see Evadne Price, and there's that excitement. And what's all this about? And this woman would come on with the turban, and she had the crystal ball and everything else. And there is something in the archetype of that pulls you in. And of course, it's not the real astrology. Half of that is entertainment and so on. But it pulls you in because it has a mystical element to it that anyway captured my imagination. And years later, lo and behold, I met a theosophist, I met an occultist, and so on. And I had access to that library of traditional astrology and so on, at a young age, 15, 16.
But Richard, here we are on the flip side of that as professional astrologers doing real technical astrology, and yet we're doing it in a form that still has an entertainment value.
Of course. And I believe in the entertainment value. I do. I think it's important as long as it carries a quality with it, rather than placing the astrologer's fame at the center of the performance. Anyway, perhaps I'm treading on difficult ground here, but
not at all.
That's the way I would put it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, shall we look at the chart that's up here? It's the chart of Joseph Campbell. It's
such a wonder. It's such nice to talk with astrologers, though, and with the span of experience and interest.
Absolutely. And as Rick said, you never stop learning. And I did an interview recently where somebody was talking about that, and they boasted that they hadn't read an astrology book for 10 years. And I thought, what a terrible thing to admit to. That really bothered me. And I thought, if I ever stop reading and learning, it's probably time to just be quiet and turn off the computer, turn off Zoom. All right, so let's take a look at this chart in front of us. We're looking at the chart of noted writer, philosopher, and storyteller Joseph Campbell, author of The Hero with 1,000 Faces. You can watch Campbell in a series of videos entitled The Power of Myth. I'd recommend looking at those when you can. And of course, he's perhaps best known for his phrase, what's really an Aries instruction, to follow your bliss, which encourages people to have the courage to say yes to life and to an inner adventure and a life of questioning. His hero's journey can be seen in stories all over film and media, most famously Star Wars, and even in The Lion King. So let's take a look at his chart. We're going to start with looking at the sun, moon, ascendant, anything that stands out in particular. Rick, are you happy to, as the Aries as well, are you happy to go first and say something?
Oh, I'd love that.
Oh, okay.
Go for it, Richard.
No, I'd love you to go first. The Aries, go
first. Yes, yes. I live not on the leading edge, but on the bleeding edge. My Aries aphorism is ready, fire, aim.
Ready, fire, aim. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyhow, Joseph Campbell, consummate Aries. Aries is the sign of the pioneer, the person who is not afraid to go to places where no one has gone before. And maybe that's not exactly fair. They can be afraid, but they have the courage to overcome their fear and still push into those places. So with Joseph Campbell, not only is he a fiery, enthusiastic, and the word enthusiasm is a really good Aries word because it really means entheos, with God. And Aries doesn't know self from other. Aries is the baby who can play with fingers and toes, thinking that there's something else, but everything is part of self. And so in a way, Joseph Campbell, as this pioneer, kind of created a whole new genre of academic study. Prior to his work, there was nothing like it. I mean, people studied mythology, or they studied this subject, or they learned the Greek myths. But here comes this guy who kind of takes them and in some ways broadens our concept, not only with that Aries sun. I know we're supposed to go sun, moon, rising, but the fact of the matter is, on the day that he was born, if you drew a straight line from the earth to the sun and then kept going, on the far side of the sun would be Mercury in line with the sun. And then if you went another couple 100 million miles, Jupiter would be in line with that. So he's an Aries who has Mercury, which is the sign or the planet of communication. So he's an Aries doing new things, but his whole thing is about words. It's about communication. And with Jupiter, Jupiter is the magnifying lens. It makes things bigger. So here's an Aries who went into something new and turned it into an entire universe of things. One thing I want to say before I go on is that most people don't know a part of Joseph Campbell who I totally admire, and that is he wrote this book, which you may not be able to see. I'll tell you the name of it. It's a skeleton key to Finnegans Wake. Now, anybody who knows their English literature knows there's only about 4 or 5 people in the universe who can understand Finnegans Wake.
Yes.
And Joseph Campbell was not only one of them, he was the first. He was the first. This was written in the 1930s when he was off in a cabin in the Adirondack Mountains in upstate New York somewhere. And he spent a couple of years reading and writing about Finnegans Wake before he ever stepped into this whole other universe. And again, it's an Aries thing. He went somewhere where no one else ever had gone.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Richard, do you want to add anything about the Aries myth, the Aries idea here?
Yeah, the sun in Aries, where the sun is, it is our contact with the vital life force. And in symbolic form, it shows us where we can be most enthusiastic about life, most alive with life. And when it's in the sign of Aries, the sign of the rising sap, of a kind of intoxication with the sun, which is why it's exalted in this sign. we have a need to not only prove the identity in a kind of psychological sense, but in a way to be an ambassador of the spirit of life, of pushing it forward. And whenever I saw Campbell in his lectures, you know, on YouTube and everything else, he was so vital. It's difficult to say, but Rick's got it. There's a kind of vitality that comes through the voice. And as Rick said, the Mercury gives us the educator, the enthusiasm with the Jupiter. But Jupiter also rules over a kind of abstract knowledge of the eternals, and I would place archetypal principles and Jung and so on, all on that Jupiter idea. And of course, Mercury rules the ninth house. And we have here, and Sun square that Neptune in the ninth. I was thinking through what I could call Campbell, and he wasn't religious, but I could say that in his communications and in his lectures and in his books, he seemed to be a kind of secular mystic.
Oh, yeah. Krishnamurti once asked Joseph Campbell, he said, "Joseph, how do you meditate?" And Campbell replied, "I dot I's and cross T's."
Well, that's it. You see, Rick, you know, he's got his sun in the sixth, and I was thinking about that. And sometimes the sixth house has to do with collation. You collate materials, and he went around the world, you know, in that kind of thing, and working them all out in his series of books on Occidental mythology and the mythology of creation and so on and all that. And by the way, there is the video of The Power of Myth. I just thought I would put it there with Bill Moyers that he did in 1988. It's a wonderful series. And there is the other book. And I didn't know that book, but this is The Hero with the Thousand Faces. So that Aries principle, what I got off of Campbell is his enthusiasm. Yeah. There are some things on YouTube where he's being interviewed in Honolulu, which was his home in his later years, after being an academic, interested in anthropology, meeting Jung several times. And he was so vital. And I think that's, talking about the sign of the pioneer, I think the Aries idea is to spark off the interest in other people too. It can be quite, by its very presence, it can encourage you to move forward, to be the best you can, and the rest of it. So with that moon in Leo too, there's a spark of a drama, an emotional pull to performance. And when you see him speak, you see there's a slight performance coming through as well. So that's what I would say, that he's fulfilling that sun in the sixth house as collating a lot of material, trying to bring it all together in one thing so that he could explain it and get a sense of order in terms of the religious ideas. So he wasn't just a mythologist. In his explanations of myth, he was entirely very practical, that you could take his information and use it for yourself. So it wasn't just this academic notion. He was very, very encouraging of people to do their own work and to embody the myth of the hero, you know. And you talk about Finnegans Wake. He took some phrases from Finnegans Wake, actually, from James Joyce. But I've never read it. I couldn't get past the second page.
Oh, well, I'll tell you, I have a copy of Finnegans Wake by my bedstand. And about 15 years ago, I decided that I had to read it, which is when I bought this book. Yeah. And I would read like 3 or 4 or 5 pages from Finnegans Wake, and it felt like I was standing in front of a Jackson Pollock painting.
Yes.
You know, I knew this was a master, but I had no idea what it really was. Or maybe one of like a really obscure Dylan song where you listen to it and go, wow, that was cool. What was it? You know? Yeah. And so I'd realize I got to the end of the 3 or 4 pages just blown away, but I didn't know who the characters were, what time zone it took, or what time period it took place in, where it was, what happened. And then I would take out this book, which goes page by page, line by line, and deciphers it. And I would read this and go, holy smokes, wow. Yeah. And then I would go back to the book and I couldn't make any connection to it at all. I mean, even with this, that's how obtuse Finnegans Wake is. I mean, Ezra Pound said of Finnegans Wake, this is crazy. This is a stupid book. There's nothing intelligent in this at all. And of course, Ezra Pound was, by many people's accounts, a poet who had gone off the deep end completely. Yeah. So Campbell was a total amazing intellect. And that Mercury conjunct Jupiter, again, it makes the intelligence even greater. Conjunct the sun in Aries. But you talked about the Leo moon. If the sun is who we are, our vital connection, I think is what you used that word.
The connection to the vitality of the life force.
Okay, if that's the sun, then the moon is how we reflect that. Yeah. Vitality. It's how we absorb it and respond and reflect to it. And the moon in Leo, not only is Aries and Leo both fire signs, so there's a compatibility there, but astrologically, when two planets are in the same element, as you guys know, here, fire and fire, and they're close to the same number, the aspect becomes known as a trine, which is a smooth flow of energy.
Yeah.
And so here we have this guy with all of this stuff packed in the sixth house, his daily routine, his work that was always aimed at a larger cause, but it was about the sheer power of showing up and doing what he did and trying the moon, and that moon is in the 10th house, and there it gets seen. There it's the hero's journey, which has become like something that is almost ubiquitous in so many different fields now. The idea that we each, every one of us, have this journey to take, and it's all, and regardless of how we take it, the fact is that when we step off the path of the three-dimensional world, we step into a world where we go on a journey, and that journey, just like a journey of psychoanalysis, everybody's journey is different, but there are signposts along the way that make everybody's journey the same.
Well, yes, and it represents the idea of archetypal forms, basic, very fundamental human patterns of which our individual life is important, but nevertheless, we follow that path of the sun. Yeah. From coming to above the horizon, we come into life, it goes to its apotheosis, and then eventually into its own death. And it follows that primal, the basic myth in life was the rising of the sun, as the Egyptians knew, and so on. Anyway, so I don't want to carry on because I want Frank to come in there.
So what about his Libra rising? This is, we talk about the big three, so he is an Aries, he feels like a Leo, and yet he rises like a Libran.
What's your feeling about that, Richard?
I'm going to take that Libra ascendant on a more esoteric level, rather as I take, William Lilly, the great 17th century astrologer who had Jupiter in Libra, and I've often described that as a kind of interface between the heavens and the earth. He's a mediator. And so therefore there is a sense that to which he's taking us to a higher order and trying to mediate between the human and the divine, the upper world and the lower world. I never met him. I don't know how he was personally, but I'm sure he was a very collegiate, very Libran fellow, concerned about, fairness and all of that. And when you see him in the Bill Moyers interview, he can't wait to do the Aries, but there is a moderation of a politeness and grace and this idea that interaction really should be that, even though he wanted to give his information very, very forcefully, and he would take the stage, very Leo, very Aries, but he would moderate it. And I think that he was that in the sense of trying to form a dialogue between the heavens and the earth, trying to form a dialogue. And I called the Jupiter in Libra in William Lilly's chart as a kind of cosmic mediator, between the heavens and the earth. And so I'd like to see that rather than just characterological statements about his character, of Joseph's character, as that archetype of the intermediary between something, the lower half and the upper half, and trying to find a balance between the cosmic, the archetypal, and the human, and trying to form a dialogue or a dance between both of those. And that's how I would like to describe that Leo ascendant.
Well, you talk about the moderating factor of that Libra rising, and let's note that the planet Saturn, which astrologically is the planet of holding back. It's the planet of creating boundary. It's the planet of sobriety and seriousness. Yeah. And so you have this, as you called it, collegial. I like that word, but there's that sense you can imagine him in the university with other professors, with his students, playing out his role as it should be. No surprises. No, that's what he is. But with the Saturn harmonized or trining 1/3 of a circle to the ascendant, you can't pass him off as a lightweight, because that Saturn says, I'm holding back stuff that is not because I don't want you to know. It's just I know too much to bring into this moment, and so I'm going to deliver it methodically. And then you add to the fact that the third point on this grand triangle, grand equilateral triangle, we astrologers call a grand trine, is Pluto, which then adds another layer of depth, intensity, perspective to it. And all of a sudden, anyone who ever wants to say, Libra is a lightweight, I mean, we hear that sometimes in astrology. Well, it depends what it's connecting to. And this is not a lightweight. And then we also just need to, before I quit, the Mars opposition so closely that even though he's presenting himself in the outer world through that ascendant of being collegiate, this guy can punch, or punch back. Yeah.
Yes. And I just want to say something about that Saturn in Aquarius. It's the Jordan Peterson has Saturn in Aquarius, and Jung has Saturn in Aquarius. And there's something to do with, I think Campbell initially wanted to be an anthropologist because he was very interested in an archaeologist looking at, social theory, but then he came across mythology. Yes, I like your description very much as the Pluto and the Saturn linking with the ascendant as a heavyweight, indeed. Anyway, Frank, would you have anything to add, or you?
Yes, I think that's interesting, the Saturn Pluto, because they are traditionally the heavier, serious planets, aren't they, linking to the ascendant? I imagine with Libra rising, Joseph Campbell really grappled with some of the big questions. He wasn't afraid with that Mars, with the Aries energy there to ask the big questions, but also to struggle with them, to grapple with them for perhaps years. I know he went. He had an extensive period of study, reading hours and hours a day for about 5 years. Is that right? And just absorbing that. And that feels very Sun, Mercury, Jupiter here, but also the square to Neptune, where really it needs to come through maybe a sense of osmosis, really, rather than perhaps just traditional Saturn-type learning. I look at that sixth house and I think, well, he proved that God is in the detail, in the sense of, really providing a source of life. The sixth house is so often denigrated as a house of servants or servitude. Yeah. And yet we know that in order to function well, in order to be to have well-being, to have a sense of who we are, we need to take care of the detail. We need to take care of the sixth house. That Mars on the descendant, the Aries energy, is the real life coach energy. I know that's a popular phrase, or maybe overused phrase nowadays, but that sense of really being able to trigger, motivate people, push them out of their comfort zone. My feeling with Aries is less about creating something new, but breathing new life into an existing form. So taking something... Nice. Yeah. As he did, taking the mythology and say, well, think of it in a different way. One of his great quotes, and I've got a few of them, which we can end with perhaps, is, well, what you want must come from you. And you've got to believe that when somebody has all those planets in Aries and the moon in Leo. If you read the sun sign books about Aries and Leo, they're self-absorbed, self-focused, selfish, all those words that are thrown at both of those signs. And yet, really, if you don't know how to take care of yourself, appreciate yourself, you mustn't really dare to try and do that for anybody else. And I think this is the initial sense of those two signs, the Aries and the Leo. Dare to have the courage to put yourself first, to understand that your life is what you have, that promise, that the time that we have, the life force that we have. I think his Aries energy speaks about having courage, which of course is the most essential quality of all, really, because if we don't have any courage, we can't attempt all the other things that we might want to do. So,
Frank, I assume you know his quote, which is exactly about courage. It's the cave we fear the most holds our greatest treasure.
Right. Well,
that's exactly what you were just saying.
That's beautiful. Yes.
And I've got a couple of quotes here, and I just wanted to also mention this cultural dimension, I suppose, or collective dimension of the Uranus opposite Neptune. And we can see in Campbell this taking on of the more scientific reasoning, cerebral understanding of things. You see, with this Uranus in Sagittarius. Sagittarius can represent science as well as religion, because it's to do with the far reaches of human understanding. And Rick mentioned Krishnamurti, and of course he had Uranus in the ninth, in the same sign. But we can see that almost that opposition at the time that he was born as an opposition to the mystical. So there was the scientific and the mystical coming through, and there were all kinds of new movements. There's Mitrovic and the Blavatsky, and I think in 1904, I think around about that time, was the new the Christian Science Monitor came in, and it was to do with prayer, or prayer as technology. So there was a lot there. So that all of that stuff is, apart from the moon, is captured by that opposition. And so he takes on that. And this is why I said it was a kind of secular mysticism. There's a science of astrology. There's a science of mythology. And he took it into, you see, as Jung did, although Jung preferred to look at it in a psychological sense. I got a wonderful quote here about Neptune in the ninth. God is a mystery that transcends all human categories of being and non-being. So he was aware of a transcendent existence. I don't know to what extent he was more academic, more Uranian, or what extent, Saturn in Aquarius. And this was the trouble with Jung. Saturn in Aquarius, you see, opposite to Uranus. Was he the outsider? Was he the scientist? So maybe he never reconciled these things, but myth for him was the connection to the transcendent, was the connection to a higher order of existence. Yeah, and like Jung, it was to do with this is the thing. Mythology of all nations is the common theme that we're all under. It is that brotherhood of man thing that brings us together, that we're all involved in the same basic cosmic drama that actually astrology shows, which is a very Aquarian element. So I just wanted to say a few things about that as well, and that opposition.
Rick, did you have anything final to say about any aspect of the chart that struck you at all?
No, I as an Aries, I look at a chart and I go first shot, best shot, and I think that his Sun, Mercury, Jupiter, and Mars, all in Aries, the Sun, Mercury, Jupiter clustered so tightly and trine the moon in the 10th house. How could he not have a career, breaking into something new and being excited about it? That's it. I said it before.
Yes.
But we never know what a person is going to make of their horoscope, but we can certainly say that Campbell fulfilled his horoscope. And that studious sixth house bum on seat, looking, investigating, trying to piece it all together. We can see that very, very studious nature with a drive that is colossal. 4 planets in Aries, it just has to be.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, we'll end with a couple of quotes. I think that, again, that Aries stellium trine the moon in Leo really speaks so much of his chart. I find the Pluto-Uranus interesting because so many people who really were the great legends of the golden age of Hollywood were born around this time too.
Yeah.
And that Uranus Neptune could talk about bringing through technology, bringing through sound, the magic of the cinema. So we see that Uranus-Neptune opposition quite a bit in the people that in the 20s, 30s, 40s, really the golden age of Hollywood too. And Campbell had his own way of expressing that, as you both mentioned. I think the Mercury-Jupiter, the Sun-Mercury-Jupiter combo really speaks the following quotes from Campbell. He says, "I don't believe people are looking for the meaning of life as much as they're looking for the experience of being alive. And secondly, life is without meaning. You bring the meaning to it. The meaning of life is whatever you ascribe it to be. Being alive is the meaning." And I love the simplicity, the directness of that Aries. Being an Aries myself, of course, I love that. It's in the here and now. It's what you make of it. It's down to you. It's not spending 50 years blaming your parents or blaming the president, whatever it may be. There's that simplicity of, if you're looking for meaning, being alive is the meaning. Either of you want to comment on that at all?
I just want to say about, there's always more to say, isn't there, Rick? But when he said, follow your bliss with this sun in Aries and square to Neptune, what he was trying to express is the idea that if you incarnated what you were most interested in, your passion, the idea of a diamond, that you follow what you're instinctually drawn towards. What he said about that was that in doing that, you would draw to you people of a similar nature. You would draw to you that energy, and so therefore it would have a strange mystical path that wasn't delineated by the mind, but was delineated by the soul. The soul which comes alive, and of course some people thought that misabused that phrase and thought that it just means doing what you want and being hedonistic. And as I remember one of his statements when he was accused of bringing on a hedonistic society, follow your bliss and all that, he said, well, yes, well, I really should have said, follow your blisters. And when what he was talking about was the idea that the Jungian shadow also. So your bliss or your passion needn't just be in what's pleasant. What you have to follow by dint of the fact that you have a passion or you have a trauma or whatever, follow that, and it has its own working out. It doesn't always have to be so rational. Do you see what I mean? So I just wanted to say that the inspirational, visionary side of the fire signs say follow it, and it'll have its own logic. It has its own inspirational fire, which will lead you on a course. You don't know exactly where it's going, but it's entirely what Rick said about pioneering. It's entirely contrary to the usual rational working out. You get a mortgage, you get all that. He was trying to evoke a connection to the spirit and the soul, and that it would find its own route out. So I just wanted to say about that.
Thank you, Richard. Any final words, Rick? No? Okay, great. Well, thanks very much, both of you, for that. To my co-host, Richard Swatton, and to our very special guest, Rick Levine. You can find us on www.astrologysquad.com, also on YouTube, and please subscribe. Thanks for watching, and see you soon. Thanks, both of you. Thank you.